Since I have a very great and powerful enemy to overthrow, since I know that was definitely a childhood thing. My own worst enemy by lit was not a thing when I was a kid, but and they are the perfect kind of enemy for me, in that they have a perfect backstory, and or equally there are these enemies called Briarhearts, so you could pickpocket the Briarheart out boom, because there is this enemy out there called the Septagonoids who literally want to wipe out the entirety. It's sort of how do you keep your enemy on their toes? You act like a complete madman whilst having he has found a way to defeat, and he eats his enemies for breakfast, quite literally, and land inside the enemy ship, because Spock's on the enemy ship because he went investigating it, and he's like, aha, all week he takes care of this enemy, that enemy, he solves problems on such a regular fucking basis, and he's 2,000 years old. That something will actually get through, so that way the game master can roll the enemy's chance to hit you, and then we'll get into the method. To survive a rough patch where I was my own worst enemy, I basically trapped everything that was me. If you want genocide, you're an enemy, and there are options, politics, and I also the Tories provide a convenient fucking enemy. Labour, when they're arseholes, there's her hands held behind her back. Our enemy are the Lodicios. They are nerds, individuals chosen for their adaptability. The enemy of my enemy is a useful ally. Winston Churchill was a monster. Okay, so we're gonna pay you an exposure. So just go over there and throw yourselves at the enemy's bombardments, and yeah. It's very easy to go to war if you can shoot the enemy at a distance. So, foul, genocidal, white supremacist enemy, then that's good enough. Right? That doesn't absolve them of their sins. They do not. A much more punchable in the face kind of enemy. Everybody's got an enemy that they despise more. That they're like, yes, the way. If you wanted to get a helicopter shot, if you wanted to get your hero shot from above, fleeing from the enemy, if you wanted to get, and again, that's in my great multiverse with order as the enemy. There is order within it, From there's a woman here to see you, Mom. She says she has knowledge of the enemy and wants to help. Jim looks up from his work. We are fighting an enemy that is very powerful. The enemy, the battlefield, with area of effect spells that hit a large amount of enemies, but don't do so much damage to individual enemies. The tank... Good enemies? Or bad enemies? Hit 2d6 plus 3 damage, and an enemy adjacent to you takes 3 damage. Cleave instantly is a feat that you can take in Pathfinder. That I could understand if there was an enemy rating that you could put there, right? So for example, for me, right, genocide, or because you're the fucking enemy now, since you're committing genocide, and we pretty much all agree that's a fucking man survives first contact with the enemy. When the enemy is a large red planet that takes 5 years to get to, that's gonna be quite a long way. there is like a feat that you can do to disarm disarm an attacker, an enemy with a essentially their view was that the entire point of the Phantom Menace was showing that the Old Republic didn't work and why this
pragmatic fuckers who care first and foremost about fighting the enemy and doing the difficult decisions that need to be
going, how dare you, come back here. Meanwhile, the enemy force that scared off the soldiers is just
they exist to beat back the enemy from the gates. That's it. There has been no social justice movement to crush you.
No, you're not. You're a big fat booger. At the same time, you've got people who are stuck behind enemy lines who are like fighting to the last and as guerrilla fighters and tentatively pro-Trump because it's better the enemy you know than the enemy you don't know. Famously was like, I will always forgive my enemies, and it kept backfiring until the point where he's like, okay, yeah, game where you're supposed to be destroying the enemy base. But also there are things to unlock. And if Skyrim has taught me anything, it's that the big enemy in the in my multiverse is coming, and they're like essentially the people who have been,
because if you see your enemy as hateful and inferior and biologically different, and how dare
get in the tank, just drive around squashing enemies. And because I would do that every time I got mad, I'd be like,
either defeat the enemy or gain concessions from the enemy, it became about surviving the enemy.
this is... Look, I am my own worst fucking enemy. Like, the reason that I've been grappling with suicide is because there is a cynic, and you're essentially... The way you are making it into an enemy is the same way that, you know... Okay, the Warrior Stone basically means tougher enemies. Because the higher your key...
Stand up for what you believe in, even if your enemies condemn you as the devil for it. Being a man in the 21st century, my subconscious used to be my worst enemy because I was so afraid.
Going to the loop. And this also means that pubes are your enemy. Okay. Pubes are the enemy, okay.
With wicked jabs and small cutting blows that slip through your enemy's defenses. At will, martial weapon, standard action, melee weapon, target one. And it gives you hope, because if we can just destroy the enemy, if we can just get our people in charge, then everything will...
That my forces wouldn't have to fire upon enemy soldiers. So he technically made the right decision, because, you know,
to a large extent, the enemy of men that is causing us to suffer is other men, is the and condescending and patronizing ways. I trained my enemy to become the...
It's better the enemy you know than the enemy you don't know. Or at least it's better the enemy everybody recognizes. Being nice there. That you were like, we don't need to drag this shit up and make you into an enemy because you're good guys. But later on, there's harder enemies, so you level up faster. But it also takes an awful long time to get good.
Dressed as the enemy. With so many of the enemy's policies, yes, we are going to cut down on welfare scoundrels.
It's that, you know, the viewers are the enemy, you know. Because the viewers are the people who will share your shit to 4chan, and then it's about the MRI, about why MRIs are not fun. I explained that I am my worst enemy. I hate myself. Consider Phlebas, and it features the culture as the enemy. So read Consider Phlebas by Ian M. Banks. It's fucking cool. Actually, we want to keep our snake because those can be some quite tough enemies. Yeah, we want to not.
Yes, both my two entirely opposing enemies are secretly in league with each other. Make bad decisions, right? It is ideological warfare as a method of sending your enemy, who is so much more superior.
Those ways involve pissing off people. Those ways involve making yourself an enemy of the mob. And those ways,
you know, dressing like the enemy, you know, sort of immersing yourself in their world so that we aren't facing an enemy that we can fight. We aren't facing an enemy.
And it's got an enemy ship looking right the fuck back at it! An enemy ship it does not know anything about! They are serious
area of effect stuff that is moving the enemy around and is doing in some way significantly more damage. Of feminism become an enemy of the trans cause. I will always try to be someone who...
According to Populum, if he was accused by his natural enemy, the RS teacher, of not only swearing in an exam paper, but also...
And this is kind of getting to the point of, I am my own worst enemy. I am entirely my own worst enemy, and kind of... And of course this is revealed as, hey, we will cooperate because we have our mutual enemy who are the Odysseus stand, who doesn't agree, is deliberately painting all white men as the enemy. Right? And yes, okay, there is a lot of it. Is it magic to vent your stomach acid out those same suckers and dissolve the enemy alive? David laughed. They say you moved with impossible speed.
Feeling about committing suicide, then you're horrible. No. I would stay up all night with my fucking worst enemy if they were talking about committing suicide.
Who do have an enemy, who've got a boogeyman to fear, right? And who are terrified or recover it, or maybe it's a trick that will only work once against one enemy within one sort of moment, you know. Fine, you know, you can think what you like of me. It's, you know, I'm my own worst enemy. It's like, you know, I will give myself far more shit. Lucy Dance coming in as the great prophetess who's saying, look, I know this shit. I know what's going on. Your enemy are the Legitios. This is their power. Alt-right are the enemy. The far right are the enemy. I mean, austerity is fucking stupid.
A massive amount of things, a massive amount of enemies who are completely and utterly, like, empirical, so in so many wars, who has defeated so many enemies, who has got so much blood on his hands. And this is him doing a take.
White man has kind of become the enemy of the internet. Right? You know, the jocks in popular culture.
The idea of this unknown capitalistic enemy, the personification of all the evil that greed represents,
is using confusion in the game of Pokemon so that your enemy will go and attack itself, right? And to a certain extent, we see
Go to all this trouble on a whim. I needed to make sure it wasn't a Thalmor trap. I am not your enemy. I already gave you the horn. I'm actually trying.
being a phony who echoes everything the enemy is saying.
consider Phlebas. He had me rooting for an enemy of the culture. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome, and it's all like...
They copy exactly what the enemies do, right? They vindicate their enemy's position, which is against an enemy to the crown, and an enemy to the kingdom, and an enemy to the people she loves. You know?
Bad enemies. Nice enemies. Easy to kill enemies.
An enemy of feminism become an enemy of equality and justice. And I say no. No. No, I will not be that. Right. You know, the jocks in popular culture are still sort of the enemy of the world in that they're the
Games, it's more, here's an excuse to beat up interesting enemies and stuff, as opposed to, here is an actual sane concept that makes any sense.
future persecutors and future enemies. Which I suppose is fine if you just want to be a survivalist twatting off in the sense that this is the enemy's POV. You know, very much this kind of story is very much from the bad guy's point of view. But if it's a case of, but would this mark them out as an enemy? No. They get an absolute trolls and abuse. It is a target for a fucking gun because you are literally the enemy now, and you are literally going to die. Everybody's nerves. He's making a lot of enemies. And he's being fabulously successful. Which means enemy everybody recognizes as such and will try to stop, than it is the enemy that everybody thinks is a glorious feminist hero, who will then fuck Trump victory over that. Give me an enemy with the power to fucking make sure that peace is there. We all have fucking bigger enemies, and they are called the alt-right, they are called the far-right, they are called the fucking...
To his arch enemy who he'd just met as kind of a like, hey, okay, don't ever do evil ever again.
Questions on OkCupid about, you know, gun ownership, and it's like, for me, if you have a gun, full enemy, you know, if you are someone who believes in saying that, oh, well, this marks this person out as an enemy rating, right? But now the police have made themselves the enemy. Now the police have been mowing down black person after black person after black person and showing
Basically dump Voyager behind enemy lines, and suddenly the Borg are like, crap, we really can't go focusing.
the idea is that the enemies are going to be smart. So if they know you've marked them, if they know they've got a mine past me, you're like, if you answer that, full enemy, full fucking enemy. Like, if you want genocide, you're an enemy, you know, and there are, right, they can deliver one strong, powerful hit against one enemy, but they can't really really do both. Now the good thing
of making yourself an enemy of the mob, and those ways involve you failing and making an enemy of people, and thus disappearing into
something, or I'll think, and then bad things, because I'm my own I'm my own worst enemy. So it's like, I'm listening to music. I'm not.
We have apprehended half a dozen of the enemy, stripped them, restrained them, and contained them under guard. Attempts at interrogation, and I mean, Lucy gave up instead, Lord Lucian. I'm so tired. Tired of making friends and enemies and hard choices. Tired of having to...
You know, Bernie Sanders can get elected in America, right? If the enemy team can get an anti-establishment figure elected,
when the people that you consider your enemies are saying, "Hey, how are you? You had a good day." The victims of an enemy that irradiated them to the point where the only way they could survive.
but game masters will tend to roll the enemy's attacks secretly, so that way they can cheat the system a little bit. And you know, there is going to be Congress and the Senate working against Trump because he is the enemy that we know he's going to fucking be there. But don't do so much damage to individual enemies. The tank, the defender takes the damage. The leader, Contravoxite are designed to be horrific enemies. And so there is this story, the Contravoxite Survivor, which was entirely exploring, okay, the alt-right are enemies of the people who are my real enemy, the conservatives, and the picking flowers, you're also leveling up, and so the enemies are leveling up, and now, because you've not been focused. In this war, what we need is to spread the guns and rise up, comrades, to defeat the enemy. And it's just, no, you're fucking wrong.
Because you don't need... Because at that point in the game, enemies are slow enough, the enemies are low level enough.
Nazi, because this time the Nazi is persecuting their enemies instead of persecuting them. My enemy is very powerful. Very, very powerful. And I can't take it on alone.
Stormcloaks, because A, they're racist, and B, they are totally working for the enemy. But you can still pick them and fight with them. Like, just constantly throughout it's, ooh, are they going to become enemies? Are they going to kill each other? Are they going to tear their clothes?
Or a peaceful revolution, in the sense that it outlines how the enemy of the establishment in Britain work. You are going to create radicals. If you say these are the enemy, we must destroy them, then you are basically no. They get an absolute 0 on the enemy's scoring spectrum. Whereas, like, who will bring the pain to the enemy? Social justice warriors aren't warriors at all. They are social justice guardians at...
What you know? I did a somersault!
Enemy robot, dead ahead.
Let's go!
Enemy of people, and thus disappearing into the dust as an enemy. Like, I feel
is very powerful. It's very powerful. The enemy is a rich establishment that straddles the continent, subject to only one market at a time. A new mark succeeds a mark that was already in place. In addition, whenever an enemy that is adjacent to you shifts or makes
are going better than expected, but we are a long way from putting down a riot, never mind the enemy. Jane says, so far, we are...
I'm not gonna do it. Trump is the enemy. Trump supporters are the enemy. Alt-right fuckers.
feeling that you have helped to create more enemies against you. I hope you feel so very, very fucking happy. Because this
about how the enemies are going to attack. The computer is what gives out the quests. The computer is every
deserted corridors and pavements, grotesque exaggerations of childhood enemies or fears, a sobbing, a faint sob.
I guess sometimes you just need to have a laugh about how fucking stupid your enemies are. I mean, it's like I've got a fucking mug who don't give a shit, who will ride into enemy lines and get them weak. Because you see, when the left wing are upset, is about being unafraid to make enemies and stand up for what you believe in, even if your enemies condemn you.
4. If a melee magic item has hit and done damage to an enemy on that player character's turn, they may... There is a Bioshock 1 and 2 and Infinite, XCOM Enemy Unknown, Half-Life 2,
That's like, okay, I'm now the monster. I'm now the fucking enemy, and that's not good. I need to do something about that. And we need to know who our enemy is, so that we can convince them to come over to our side before.
Voyager was meant to be there. It's like a covert behind enemy lines thing designed to take out the Borg.
Or 90% or something, right? And it will also have an enemy rating, right? Which is, you know, which is saying that...
And then that way they can sort of be like, okay, whew, time to fight the enemy. Into a stasis pod, be unfrozen. In time to kind of...
But I am surrounded by the enemy, and that I'm not going to give in. I'm being a coward. I'm running away from the enemy, and what I should really be doing is going on the fucking Daily Show and telling them on my best friend, who was the brother of my worst enemy in primary school. So yes, Bring Me to Life. That's a good one. I fucked things up. I fucked up my channel. I made enemies that I did not intend to make, and
when I, myself, am my biggest enemies, kind of considering, you know, to be or not to be, is the constant, oh, the enemies are the Tongs or the Triad or the Yakuza or...
this isn't war. This isn't a case of two enemy soldiers, you know, who are just following orders, you know. Let's just be reasonable and focus on the enemy. And yet, the Tories are so fucking weak that Corbyn just has to go along and say, hello, yes, so much for time. And so, essentially, like, enemies will properly upgrade their shit. I don't, you know. Because anytime something goes wrong, it's the enemy, right? It explains so much in your life. Anytime something goes wrong, well, it's the enemy. What do you... I am my own worst enemy. Because I don't...
The plot is, it's basically the invisible enemy meets Dalek. Because there is a Dalek who's kind of mentor figure turned out to be an evil arch enemy from a version of the future who then got trapped. And Trump, I will go for the enemy that we know. However, if there is even a 5% fucking chance that that story is real, he raises up, flying in a crucifix as he is immortal and goes to forgive his enemy. It's just, I mean, you thought all of this bullshit happened because of him. We know that. The point is that when an enemy is so dangerous, focusing on fighting the enemy. She's focusing on the war effort and, well, being championing violence in a country where the enemy has guns, and where you can get a gun too. Yeah, that's basically it. Your skills with attacking enemies go up all the time because you're always attacking things to kind of... I no longer feel like the fascists are a worthy enemy for me.
Also, Gorbachev is an enemy of the culture. It establishes it in that first scene. He is being executed.
About the fact that an enemy you can see is a much easier scapegoat than an enemy you can't see. It is about the fact
We can fight back against you because you know what? You're the enemy. You don't know about us. Okay, one way or another, we're fucked.
the first day, my last day of primary school ended with me smacking my my worst enemy's head repeatedly against the ground, going, who are you going to be your friends and who are going to be your enemies? And Sam Harris is like, but no, facts. And it's just
Famously would always forgive his enemies, and kind of Cato the Younger would decided to stab himself, and then
Only the old tales about the ancient heroes who would use the voice to defeat the enemies of Skyrim. They say the emperors used to be dragonborn.
the point of these enemies in the world today is that they are shifting and uncertain. If you shifts or makes an attack that does not include you, you can make a melee-based attack against that enemy as an immediate interrupt. Except I know who my enemies are now. Because they made it pretty darn clear they want to know. And then Tony Blair rocks up with neoliberalism. Tony Blair rocks up dressed as the enemy. With so many of the that's kind of the point to a certain extent, but yeah, I am my own worst enemy. But the Game Master gets to send multiple enemies against people, and hate feminism. Go on, hate feminism. Be like us. Become an enemy of feminism. Become an enemy of equality and justice.
like us to lead you right into the path of your worst enemies. Yeah, cool. Thought you'd like it. Cheers. We're going home now.
You're still gonna go over to the enemy and fucking murder their asses, but you do so with a certain understanding that you can always judge a man by the quality of his enemies. Well, if the alt-right are my enemies, then what their enemies do, right? They vindicate their enemies' positions, right? The key to neoliberalism.
Oh, Will they become enemies? Will they kill each other? Will they tear their clothes off and have sex with each other? Sort of tragic, really. The great enemy are right, but too mentally ill to see the arguments against it.
Fourth fighter. Encounter powers. Spinning sweep. You spin beneath your enemy's guard with a long, powerful cut, then sweep your left.
That's automatically unlocked when you meet the prerequisite level, because there are enemies you run into that are tough, that are genuinely. Because the higher your key fighting skills are, the harder the enemies will be. Mage is basically the invisible enemy. That is the story in which King K9 was introduced. Has it because it little advice or understanding, because men are the enemy, white men are the enemy, and they're young and they're privileged and they've got power and liberation, only to find that they were just as big a fucking enemy as the one they tried to get away from. Oh, there is no threat. You're introducing capitalism as an evil enemy, and whereas the fiction I am writing now is from the Farshnik's arch enemy's perspective, the Bam Kirsch. The Bam
That the alt-right have given me. It is that, as enemies go, they are very shit, and that probably does not affect well on me.
We aren't facing an enemy that we can, take some kind of noble last stand against. They keep going at it. They keep chopping through the enemy lines. They're like, Scorpion just, hey, calls the fucking war and the Geneva fucking Convention, right? They may be the enemy, you may have to fuck them over, but you can do so in ways they have been that have been, marked off as the enemy in my head. These are the people who were over there. Oh, frenemy, frickin'.
Over here! Keep going, friend. That station was ready.
The Cruel said it best. It's delivering the briefcase nuke to the enemy's capital. It's we
Get a helicopter shot if you wanted to get your hero shot from above, fleeing from the enemy. If you wanted to get, so if any time something goes wrong, well, it's the enemy. What are you talking about? It's the fucking enemy. And it gives you hope, because if we can just destroy... I genuinely remember my last day of primary school, I was just like smacking my worst enemy's head at that school, just smacking his...
The Farshnik is the natural enemy of the Bam Kirsch. You get a elder god to capture. It's a scope. It lets you zoom in to see enemies in the distance, which is a good thing to have if...
And the ways in which I didn't properly fight the enemy that chose to stalk me, right?
Yes, we're very old enemies. And if my suspicions are correct, they might have something to do with the dragons.
Thing is, though, my brain is a bigger enemy to me than any of them are. My mind is my worst enemy, right? Like, if 4chan could ever figure out, but it's not 4chan, it's Pop, the back burner. It's why it's so safe. Even the great enemies of the multiverse respect Joyce World as a safe haven of peace and tranquility.
Trump supporters are the enemy. All grabbing horrible shit so that their ideas can affect more and more people so that your enemy can become weakened and fractious and make...
Began with the Doctor and the Doctor's enemies timey-wiming with her life. And then you have Clara, who again, if you'd like to see them going up against other enemies, or how do you think they'd fare, you know? Could the septagonoids take
all these other siege units? They can attack every other kind of enemy unit, apart from melee siege units.
You know, talking to the police is a death sentence, because, you know, the police are the enemy, you know. The police...
I trained my enemy to attack me in more racist and condescending and patronizing ways. A Conservative member fought alongside against a greater enemy. He doesn't call Jeremy Corbyn, you know, the guy we were at.
I find it helpful at times like these to remind myself that our true enemy is instinct. Instinct?
Your family, as the enemy is advancing upon you with these sticks of metal, just out.
Guns who are just... women with guns who are just sort of plinking away at the enemy time after time. And it was very...
which is the sort of the idea that, you know, understanding the enemy by sort of, you know, dressing like the enemy, you know. Yeah, I am my own worst enemy, and this is why this was so much hell. Like, your zone of influence. You have taken away production and resources away from the enemy, and they're ready to you know, bring the fight to the enemy, to cancel the apocalypse, you know. And then suddenly focus on Yasena, because anytime something goes wrong, it's the enemy, right?
It's got the same sort of thing of, like, two enemies, you know, sort of putting on a show of being at war, but... And he managed to forgive his enemy, and then the Doctor kind of moped for a bit, but met Donna Noble and knew enter his bloodstream. You know, it was almost like Doctor Who, the Invisible Enemy, with, you know, the Doctor being cured of the... Calculate it in real time. You're playing against a person who has to be 5 different or more enemies at a time. There is because men are the enemy, white men are the enemy, and they're young and they're privileged and they've got everything, and we don't fucking... They keep the food available and squash their enemies. There's still more I can do to help you, but you are gonna have to do this yourself. This crescent shape, moving forward and then turning inside out and surrounding the enemy and killing them all, right? Well, that only really works as the little school kids play with their guns shooting at the enemy. Except they're not shooting at strawmen, they're shooting at... Are going to find themselves outnumbered and outgunned and against an enemy that fucking wants it fucking badly. This is not going to get...
Balance beam, and Sean made it through the course only to slip on a patch of mud and slide into the enemy's hands, so we made it over the hill. We'd heard...
At that point in the game, enemies are slow enough, that enemies are low level enough that just your basic fight, you risk making the enemy the sovereign people. And God, I am my own worst enemy. This is why this was torture. This is why this was hell. You can always judge a man by the quality of his enemies. And, you know, you know, reading the Seventh Doctor books and about this guy, David Cameron is his own worst enemy, because David Cameron is the person who has created a threat to his own life.
A shockwave of sound slams into the enemy. Encounter, arcane, implement, thunder. Standard action, range 10, target, 1 creature. You can always judge a man by the quality of his enemies. And so, I suppose, if there is one effective insult,
and the poor are being made to suffer because of the rich. But it's because it's having an enemy to fight. It's that sense
action whereby the only view of our enemy that shows up is the very worst caricature of it, right? Like,
through the the hall of his enemies with a nuclear bomb strapped to his chest, just like
explains so much in your life. Anytime something goes wrong, well, it's the enemy. What are you talking about? It's fucking enemy.
These cavalry charges. Imagine us charging into enemy infantry, trampling all underfoot. We would be unstoppable. Laura laughs. It's screwed. It is thoroughly screwed, and it's got an enemy ship looking right the fuck back at it.
Getting to know the enemy to a certain extent, you know, it's almost like at a certain point you have.
Shit. I'm gonna go and help my worst enemy because I can't be prejudiced about this.
To do anything except fucking stand there and wave a stick in the enemy's face and then vaguely walk where the other people are walking. So I'm not against possibly someday throwing in an enemy that is for all intents and purposes a were-shark to a and again I'm fucking saying this to the fucking enemy.
They are right by the enemy. They are keeping them from advancing.
When you are going to be lecturing your enemies as you kick their fucking ass every goddamn week, saying, I am the Doctor, look me up.
Persecute people because of the colour of their fucking skin. Then consider me your enemy. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the fuck I am going to do.
Pretty much, at the moment, white men are the enemy. They are. Because white men are basically saying, we will exterminate everybody else.
There is actually a second level fault.
You got an enemy on your tail. Use the
Women, black people, trans people, gay people, like, when you have an enemy to focus on, you're saner. Because anytime something is the enemy. Trump supporters are the enemy. Alt-right fuckers, you're the enemy. And I can tell you now, you will be full. Combat challenge. Every time you attack an enemy, whether that attack hits or misses, you can choose to mark.
And I feel like if you answer yes to that, then that's full enemy rating, right? If you want the apocalypse to enemy, I am entirely my own worst enemy, and kind of the greatest act of sadistic victory that the or at least it's better the enemy everybody recognizes as such and will try to stop than it is the enemy that means that do not turn you into a massive dick, right? You can fight the enemy without giving up your soul.
Imagine a squadron of us, perhaps with gunners on board to drop bombs or spy on enemy settlements. Highness, you have a Royal Air Force. Terror from the Deep, XCOM Apocalypse, XCOM Interceptor, XCOM Enforcer, XCOM Enemy Unknown, Xenoclash. Xenoclash 2. Julius Caesar. I am not gonna keep fucking forgiving and forgiving and forgiving my enemies. If you come onto my channel, you can. And Americans during the Second World War would like get into the mind of the enemy, would get into, you know, sort of. Who are your enemies? Well, my enemies are a bunch of fucking morons.
1d8 plus 7 fire damage, and the next enemy that hits you with a melee attack before the end of your next turn takes 2 fire damage. And
The world is scary! I didn't know this! We've got a lot of enemies! This is a guy who will tweet after becoming president when the majority.
Well, I figure that actually a lot of the opposing enemies are gonna be.
the multiverse, they existed to fight 2 enemies. Those enemies are now gone. They start to fragment. I mean, it still exists where you are presumed the enemy just by the fact of the gender that you happen to have, by the skin color. Ourselves in the confusion of trying to attack this enemy. Now, it is true that there are genuinely horrible terrorists.
Okay. Pubes are the enemy, okay? Because if it does, there should have been another way. Venom, that's the main enemy, the black suit Spider-Man.
Effect. Until the end of your next turn, whenever an enemy hits you with a melee attack, you push that enemy 1 square, and it takes 5 lightning damage.
And maybe get in an attack before the enemy. It's actually a lot more beneficial if the entire party has high AC.
Forces to build my strength, get my enemies into position, and then I go to war.
Sadists of the world fall to me. I am my own worst enemy because I am the only one who knows all the exact. Doctor Who magazine. The Eighth Doctor clashes with a new host of enemies in the latest collection of classic adventures. This volume features 7. We can rule together. We can be friends, and the enemy is not missing in that instance. Okay, the Battle of Cannae kind of crescent becoming a paper bag surrounding the enemy pincer maneuver thing.
It became about surviving the enemy. Right. So, like, you had the suffragettes, you had women.
The poisoned lipstick. And so the Doctor is dying, killed by River, seen as an enemy by them, but they don't really care because, well, you're dying though, innit?
At a certain point, everybody's got all these awesome abilities, and so do the enemies, and so everybody's got so much healing and so much damage dealing, and so it basically outline the quest for you. They are the person who will play the enemies for you. They are the person who will.
It's like it's just legitimizing the enemy. It's just saying, well, these people who full enemy. If you are someone who believes in anarcho-capitalism, full enemy. But like, when it comes to the question of freckles, right? I've never
A man and how to fall really hard onto your enemy. The Farshnook was back then just an ordinary kid, indistinguishable from the rest of us children.
Whilst your policies may be a hair's breadth away from the enemy, you position yourself as so much different.
The shark is not an enemy. The shark is not a sentient villain. It is a threat.
An eldritch entity who would outright use his friends
to take down the enemy, to take down the monsters and villains of the world. The Daleks, when you have a super smart machine that can accurately predict what the enemy is going to do, all you have is an incredibly... This says, okay, the Doctor's going here, here are the enemies, he's gonna fuck shit up. How is he gonna do it? Sit and watch. The pits of my subconscious to torment me with. My mind has always been my worst enemy. My mind is the thing that knows the very most about me. Bigotry, I will not let myself become an enemy of feminism, become an enemy of the trans. Someone with brown skin looks strange to someone with white skin. It is about the fact that an enemy you can see the healing, because they put out range stuff that's quite damaging. But you know, for big enemies, right, like bandit chiefs and stuff that are very big, that if you have a gun, full enemy, you know, if you are someone who believes in anarcho-capitalism, full enemy. Revolution by the new enemies of global liberty, because it seems the alt-right are now actually a power. Unlike you, I can see nuance, right? I can understand why my enemy thinks a certain thing, even if I completely disagree with him. And who walks through trouble with ease, okay? Every single week, he takes care of this enemy, that enemy. He solves problems. Death of us, said Jim. We can't break through concrete. We are fucked if our enemy takes any kind of defensive measure that isn't using people. The thing about Trump is that Trump isn't some kind of archenemy. He isn't some evil genius.
And he will hunt him down and kill him, because my enemy wants nothing more than for me to be wiped out. And if he kills my Keystone before my tale has been properly told, then that's it.
Foreseen, you know, because let's face it, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. When the enemy is, yeah, the way I'm gonna beat my big bad enemy, who I'm gonna be fighting later on, is by giving myself over to him, so he may. If I can forgive my enemies, I can certainly forgive my best friend for a moment of douchery. But what you think the sectaginoids as an enemy for the far schnook, even if you'd like to see them going up against other enemies, or how do you think they? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and I have a really fucking power.